Yeah, Beth, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can definitely hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
better.
Okay, that's me. Okay, that's okay. That's amazing. So, Rahman, would you start or should I start?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so as Rahman has already explained, and again, the report that we are building is kind of like a passion project. The aim is simple, just to provide a barrier-less learning to everyone. Um, I just feel like there are parts of market that need to be accessed by everyone, and how should I say? Especially for newbies like me, especially for the people who are learning it for the first time, there should not be much of a, I mean, uh, there is a kind of gatekeeping. I wouldn't say in the community members, but on the resources, you have to pay for everything. So we can start by making some of those precious resources freely available to everyone, so that we can take a step forward within marketing automation. This is just how should I say? I personally view this project as pure value. So regarding this session, basically the point is basically to how should I say, collect insights from all the professionals, and obviously, uh, I was checking all the experience you have, such a diverse experience. You have been a marketing director, so obviously you've had a hand in so many good campaigns, so many good mobs. So regarding that, obviously, the first question that I would like to ask you is why Marketo? What value would you see in Marketo? I mean, there are other marketing automation platforms as well.
So you're asking why choose Marketo as opposed to Pardot,
Yeah,
HubSpot, or another MAP?
yes.
Okay. I would actually not say blanket statement you should always buy Marketo. I would say you should pick the right marketing automation platform that makes sense for the size of business and the maturity of your marketing operations team. So I tend to pick Marketo when it's a later stage startup who has a built out marketing operations team of at least 2, 3 members. Because in my mind, Marketo is if we were to think about the different MAPs, I would say HubSpot and Pardot tend to be more SMB centric. Marketo is more enterprise. Eloqua is even more complex than Marketo. So typically, I see Marketo in use for late stage startup to early IPO organizations. And frankly, most of enterprise organizations, until there's a very distinct developer use case to move up to Eloqua. If I were to say, why would a young enterprise migrate off of HubSpot onto Marketo? Because that's usually probably where your question comes up of why is it worth it? Um, I would say Marketo is more complex and robust when it comes to the type of automation logic that it can run compared to HubSpot. There are some Marketo has the concept of a program, which HubSpot sort of has, but is not as sophisticated, where you can house all of your automation, your assets, and any related list in a single program and have that tie one to the Salesforce side. HubSpot has similar capability. They call them campaigns, but the complexity with which you can you can build the automation behind it is it's just a different level. So if you have a small marketing team, HubSpot is usually actually a great choice because with higher more robust features comes more complexity and the barrier to entry is hard. I have heard that many times where a smaller team struggles with navigating Marketo because it is a harder tool to learn and understand. And HubSpot has prided itself on having a really easy to use interface. I can't speak to Pardot because I haven't personally used Pardot. So I would say the tool that you pick depends on the how complex you need to run your lifecycle processes, but also whether your talent and your headcount is able to support the complexity that comes with that.
Right. Thank you so much for that. So, are there any barriers that you have seen whenever a team is implementing Marketo for the first time? So, are there any barriers which you've seen most prominent in this field?
Do you mean barriers in terms of adoption, barriers in terms of actually
Yes.
bringing the tool into the org? Any particular
Yeah.
angle that you're?
Um, I'm actually talking about both angles. First of all, whenever you adopt Marketo and then you, how should I say, make it, we make it your go-to tool. So regarding both angles, barriers in both angles, would you please explain that?
Sure. Okay. In that case, let's talk through like the end-to-end procurement, purchase, and implementation lifecycle. Because there are different challenges at each of those stages. I would say when it comes to procuring Marketo, so making the case to buy Marketo, it is a more expensive tool than Pardot or HubSpot. It is a more enterprise tool. You can usually get Pardot at a quarter of the price if you have a Salesforce account already. That's usually a very easy upsell. And HubSpot tends to be cheaper. One of the reasons HubSpot is cheaper is they are pricing you on how many marketing contacts you have, which I think is really quite clever. So HubSpot doesn't charge you for every contact you have in the database, only how many are actually readily marketable. Whereas Marketo does charge you for every contact. So if you have people who have old emails that have bounced, or they've unsubscribed from your marketing material, in Marketo's eyes, those are still records in your instance, and they will have you pay for that. There's the it means that once again, you need a big enough marketing ops team who can constantly maintain the health of your database and cleanse those records out so that it's a sustainable pricing model. But it could usually be a sticker shock upfront if you're coming from the HubSpot side. I would say when it comes to the procurement process, Marketo is now under the Adobe umbrella, and they've gone through quite a bit of transition when it comes to their papers, their legal terms, things like that. And I have, as a primary Marketo owner, struggled with that. Just being able to pass through my security team or legal team, even in the renewal process, even though they're already in existing vendors, it's candidly been painful trying to renew. So that's something that I think Marketo hopefully will figure out in the coming years. Once you purchase the tool, I would say the biggest barrier to Marketo is probably, frankly, training. Marketo has not, and I love Marketo, right? But Marketo has not done a great job in making their tool easy to learn from a self-service perspective. It does not have a robust forum like Salesforce. The Salesforce Trailhead is really great for learning the tool on your own. Marketo doesn't really have that, which typically means they will upsell you on their training module, or you work with one of the consultants in this space. And I have always done that. I always end up hiring an agency to come in and train my team. There is just a certain learning curve at play, especially if you're used to the HubSpot UI, UX. HubSpot is definitely easier to find out and navigate on your own than Marketo. So that's just something to account for. And I would say that's something I always position when I'm working on a migration, is we cannot expect the team to be fully ramped for at least 1 to 3 months, depending on how complex the processes are that we're pulling over. I would say that let's say you have perfect adoption, your team is trained on the tool. From that point on, I do think Marketo has a great community. So once you're past the initial steep training curve, I think there is a pretty wide span when it comes to how advanced you want to get as a Marketo user. You can be pretty dangerous and pretty self-sufficient on just running the instance for what your business needs for day to day, creating campaigns, creating lead scoring systems, things like that. But there's a lot of levels above that. That's basically your own prerogative. Marketo tries to encourage you to get to the more advanced use cases by having a Adobe Champion Program, used to be called the Marketo Champion Program, where every year they select 20 to 30 folks who have really utilized the tool to its fullest degree. And these champions will do office hours, they will produce content, they will post, they have usually a very active community called Marketo user groups, and I'm based in San Francisco, so SF has a very active Marketo user group. So these are the resources Marketo tries to, or Adobe tries to give its customers if you do want to become a more advanced user. You can, like we talk about, how in Salesforce, you could just be an admin where you're creating fields and running flows, or you could become a solutions architect where you're coding in Apex code and you are doing dev work. Marketo, in some ways, has those different tiers as well. There's velocity script that you can use to do custom coding in Marketo. If it comes to what is the biggest barrier, I think ultimately it comes down to where in the marketing automation maturity lifecycle you are, and what do you want the tool to do? If you only use it as a glorified email tool, that doesn't take much time to stand up, but I would also say that's not really fully utilizing the potential that the tool can provide.
I second it on the steep learning curve. Even simple emails can be quite tricky. I've read a lot about that. And I think one of the main things that I'm really noticing from based on your amazing insights is that you should be prepared. You should have a very clear goal in mind in order to proceed with Marketo. Only then obviously you can benefit more from it. And if you're just experimenting, then obviously Marketo has less room for experimentation. Coming to the next question, Alicia, you have obviously vast experience of running Marketo campaigns. What are the most important factors while running a Marketo campaign, a successful Marketo campaign?
When you use the word campaign, do you mean just marketing campaigns, like a webinar or an event? Or is it more in Marketo language? They call their automation smart campaigns. So any type of automation is also considered campaign. I'm just curious because those are two distinctly different functions in my mind. Platform ops manages the automation versus campaign operations manages the campaign and assets itself.
I think I'm leaning more towards the smart campaign side
Okay,
because that is, if I'm not wrong, that is more aligned with the lead lifecycle, right?
correct. Yes. Okay, so if we are thinking about basically, I think the question we're trying to answer then is what are some things we should keep in mind to make sure the automation and smart campaigns that we build in Marketo are efficient, are scalable, and are relatively easy to maintain over the span in the history of the life, the instance. A lot of different ways we can go about this, but I would say if I were to just pick a couple of rules of thumb, number one is Marketo can do a lot. Forgot that the Zoom does that.
Sorry.
Marketo can do a lot, but it also means Marketo can be quite expensive when it comes to the amount of sync that is pushing into Salesforce. So I'm going to assume right now you have a Marketo Salesforce sync, and those are your primary two CRMs. One thing to keep in mind, I always keep in mind, is when I'm building smart campaigns in Marketo, what is the implication on the volume and frequency of data updates that are going to go into Salesforce? What I mean is this. So let's say you have two major things you need to run in the Marketo side. And so you're building a smart campaign. Let's say your main processes are the folks are coming in and you're tagging them with attribution data. You run them through an enrichment platform, so they get Zoom info or Clearbit enriched with additional demographic or firmographic data. And then you want to score them, and then you want to MQL them, and then you want to push them into Salesforce so that SDRs can follow up. These are 5 distinctly different processes that you can build in Marketo. A inefficient way to do this would be after each process runs, you enforce a sync to Salesforce, wait for the record to sync back, and then run the next step of the process. The reason being, every time you're sending a record between Marketo and Salesforce, it takes up API calls, it slows down, there's a sync lag, and it gives you room for error. It's possible for, due to data validation rules or any other constraints you have, where the record just never syncs back from Salesforce back to Marketo or vice versa. And then you're in a world where a record will have different data in Marketo and Salesforce. A smarter way to do this would be, how can I daisy chain perhaps all 5 processes so they run through immediately? Then we feel like that's the time that sales actually needs to work this record, and then we push the record to Salesforce. So it's almost like you're bundling all the updates while in the Marketo platform before you send this record to Salesforce. So basically, you're only sending the record over 1 time instead of 5. You reduce the chance of error. And it's also, in general, I prefer to have each system does everything it needs to do before syncing to another system. So that might be one thing you want to keep in mind, is how do you want to build these automation in such a way that you're being very mindful of the time it spends between platform. And this is not just Salesforce, even though that's the most common example in my mind. This could also be if you have Workato, which is doing additional data manipulation, or if you have Segment, which is your data layer, and you're pulling information up. Being very mindful a record not ping-ponging between these systems multiple times, in general, is important for the health of the system. Other things I might take into account is, I always like to say, does the automation and the process we build pass the lottery test? Which is, if I win the lottery tomorrow and I no longer need to come in and do work here, can the next person figure out what I have done and why I built things a certain way? So having the right naming convention and the right hierarchy in Marketo helps a lot with that. But in addition to that, it's also documentation, having some type of change log for all the updates that are made. It's very, I would expect an organization to change its scoring model or MQL model multiple times. Hopefully you're learning and you're iterating on them. So do you have a source of truth that shows all the decisions you have made to change your model, to change the scoring, who signed off on this, things like that? It's important to have this trail, because if one day you've noticed that your MQL volume drops significantly, or people don't seem to be converting as well, you have a place to go back and say, okay, what are the changes we made before that drop happens? And no one in the org is going to think about that except for the marketing operations team. Because, frankly, the rest of the org won't be aware of changes you're making until it has some type of impact on the bottom line. So I think it's our responsibility to make sure we have that well documented. So probably those are the 2 things I would keep in mind. There are others when it comes to like best practices for lifecycle program versus data normalization program, but I think those will get a little bit more into the weeds.
I think those are
Actually, I'd
very,
love to.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I just have one question. Those are amazing insights, especially the lottery winner thing that you just told. I think it's very important for, to keep all the documentation in place so that, the organization should not suffer, like in a way that you have set things up and like once you leave, everything is scattered and no one has any clue what needs to be done. And I think that's like one of the major pain points when you inherit the Marketo instance. You spend a lot of time figuring out what was done, like how those automations were set up, because previous people might have set up like in the best way that they thought is best, but it's really not the best. So that's a great tip. I have one question when you were telling about the API calls and everything. I think it's very important when you have like a huge database of, when there are like hundreds and thousands of leads. So it's very important to, take care of that. So I'll give you two scenarios. You can let me know like what should be the best practice.
I'm so sorry to stop you. I do have a hard stop that I have to jump to my next call. But
Absolutely. Yeah,
if
absolutely.
I can help over Slack, answer questions, I can keep going that way.
Yeah, we can stop right away. That's fine. I think time was 11. We're 3 minutes over. That's completely fine. But whatever you shared so far, super exciting. And I think we can definitely connect via email or chat. That would be awesome. But again, thank you for your time. I won't, we won't hold you for any longer. Really appreciate your time today. And
Thank you
we'll,
so much.
yeah, so we'll stay in touch. We'll, extract more such kind of information out of you. This is exactly what we look for, because those are insights from someone who's actually working on those instances on a day-to-day basis. So thanks a lot for your time, and we'll definitely stay in touch. I appreciate all your time. All right. Thanks
Thank you
a lot.
so much,
Take care.
Nasir.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.